In the winter of 1842, a carriage departed London in the dead of night. Inside was 20-year-old Lady Cecily Harford, sold by her own father to clear a gambling debt. She was on her way to marry a man she had never met, a man rumoured to have buried 3 wives already. She believed her life was over. But 10 miles outside the city, on a mud-slicked road near Epping Forest, a single pistol shot rang out, and the carriage ground to a halt. It wasn't a highwayman who opened the door. It was the most powerful and dangerous Duke in England. And he didn't come to save her. He came to claim what he owned. This is the true, untold story of the scandal of Ashbourne Hall. London, November 14th, 1842. The rain in London does not wash things clean. It merely makes the grime slicker. That was the only thought occupying Lady Cecily Harford's mind as she stared out of the drawing-room window of her father's townhouse on Wimpole Street. The house was quiet, stripped of the servants who hadn't been paid in 3 months. The only sound was the scratching of a quill against parchment from the desk behind her. "Stop fidgeting, Cecily," her father, Baron Harford, muttered. He did not look up. He was a small man, shrinking further into his velvet coat as if trying to disappear from his own shame. "Mr. Crouch's carriage will be here within the hour. You will not look like a frightened child. You will look like a baron's daughter." "I look like a receipt, father," Cecily said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She turned to face him. "That is what I am, isn't it? The final line item in your ledger." Baron Harford slammed the quill down, ink spattering the mahogany. "You are ungrateful. Benedict Crouch is a wealthy man. He has interests in the East India Company. He owns half the textile mills in Manchester. You will never want for anything." "Except peace," Cecily countered. "They say his last wife fell down the stairs, father, and the one before that simply stopped breathing in her sleep. I am being sent to a slaughterhouse, not a marriage bed." "You are being sent to save this family." The Baron stood, his face flushed with the erratic anger of a man who knows he is in the wrong but cannot afford a conscience. "Do you think I enjoy this? The creditors are at the door, Cecily. If Crouch does not sign the settlement tonight, I go to Marshalsea debtors' prison by morning. Would you see your father rot in a cell?" Cecily looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the broken capillaries in his nose from too much port, the shaking hands of a gambler who never knew when to fold. She realized then that she didn't hate him. She just didn't matter to him. "I will go," she whispered, "but do not pretend this is for my benefit. And do not expect me to write." The arrival of the carriage was announced not by a footman, but by the heavy thud of the door-knocker. It was a black, unmarked brougham, pulled by 4 horses that looked too large for the narrow city streets. Mr. Crouch did not come to collect her himself. He had sent his solicitor, a man named Mr. Thaddeus Grist, who smelled of peppermint and damp wool. "Lady Cecily," Grist said, bowing low but keeping his eyes on her waistline, as if assessing the breeding potential of livestock. "Mr. Crouch awaits you at his estate in Derbyshire. It is a long journey. We travel through the night." "Through the night?" Cecily pulled her cloak tighter. "Surely we stop for rest." "Mr. Crouch is impatient," Grist smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "He wishes for the wedding to take place upon your arrival, before the freshness of the agreement wears off." Cecily walked out of the house without looking back. She carried only a small trunk containing 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, and a small, pearl-handled letter opener she had hidden in her boot. As she stepped into the carriage, the air inside was cold. The door slammed shut, sealing her in darkness. The wheels clattered against the cobblestones, moving north, away from the gaslights of civilization and into the suffocating dark of the English countryside. She closed her eyes and prayed for a miracle, though she knew God rarely involved himself in the business transactions of men like her father. The Great North Road, 2 a.m. 3 hours had passed. The rhythmic swaying of the carriage had lulled Mr. Grist into a snoring sleep opposite her, but Cecily remained wide awake. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the roof like handfuls of gravel. They were passing through a stretch of woodland known for its isolation. The carriage lamps cast weak, flickering shadows against the passing trees, which looked like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab them. Suddenly, the carriage lurched violently. Cecily was thrown forward, catching herself just before hitting Grist's knees. The horses screamed, a high, terrified whinny that made her blood run cold. Then came the sound that stopped her heart. Crack, a pistol shot, clear and sharp, cutting through the thunder. The carriage skidded to a halt, the wheels grinding in the mud. Grist woke with a start, clutching his chest. What? What is it? Highwaymen? He scrambled for the door handle, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't turn it. Stay down, Cecily hissed, her hand moving instinctively to her boot, her fingers brushing the cold pearl handle of the letter opener. Outside, the shouting was not the chaotic yell of bandits. It was precise, military, and terrifyingly calm. Descend, driver. Slowly. The voice was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that demanded obedience. Who goes there? The driver shouted back, though his voice wavered. This is the private property of Benedict Crouch. I am aware of the cargo, the voice replied. Step down, or the next shot takes out your knee. A heavy silence followed, then the sound of boots hitting the mud. The carriage door was wrenched open. Wind and rain swept into the cabin, extinguishing the lantern. In the flash of lightning, a silhouette filled the doorway. He was a giant of a man, wrapped in a heavy greatcoat with a high collar, a tricorn hat pulled low over his eyes. He held a flintlock pistol in one hand, steady as stone. Mr. Grist, the man said. He didn't ask. He knew. I, Grist stammered. Take the jewelry. The girl has a necklace. Take it. The man ignored him. He turned his gaze to Cecily. Even in the darkness, she felt the weight of his stare. It was a physical pressure. Lady Cecily Harford. I am she, Cecily said, lifting her chin. If she was to die in a ditch, she would die with dignity. Get out. You are a brigand, sir, Grist squeaked. Mr. Crouch will have you hanged. The man leaned in, the lamplight from the exterior catching his face for the first time. He was not old, perhaps 32, with a jawline that looked as if it had been chiseled from granite, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, grey, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, disrupting the otherwise classical perfection of his face. Crouch can try, the stranger said softly, but the king's law does not run as deep as mine in these parts. He looked back at Cecily and extended a gloved hand. Come, the mud will ruin your shoes, but it is better than where you are going. Who are you? Cecily asked, not taking his hand. I am the man who just bought your debt, he said. My father sold me to Benedict Crouch. And your father is a fool who plays cards at the White's Club on Tuesdays, the man replied. He owed Crouch £5,000, but he owed me something far more valuable, a debt of honor from the Peninsular War. I have called it in. Cecily stared at him. You are abducting me. I am repossessing you, he corrected. Now get out, or I leave you with Grist, and you can explain to Crouch why his contract is null and void. Cecily looked at Grist, who was cowering in the corner, useless and pathetic. Then she looked at the tall, scarred stranger standing in the rain. It was a choice between a known monster and an unknown devil. She took the stranger's hand. His grip was iron-hard, but surprisingly warm. He pulled her down from the carriage with effortless strength. As her feet hit the mud, she saw that he wasn't alone. 4 other men on horseback surrounded the carriage, holding torches. They wore liveries, dark green and silver. "Take the solicitor to the nearest inn," the stranger commanded his men. "Leave him with a horse. He can ride back to London, and tell Harford that the Duke of Ashbourne sends his regards." The Duke of Ashbourne. Cecily gasped, the sound lost in the wind. Everyone knew the name. William Cavendish, the Duke of Ashbourne. They called him the Iron Duke of the North. He was immensely wealthy, reclusive, and rumoured to be utterly heartless. He was a man who crushed business rivals for sport. "You are Ashbourne?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. He simply lifted her onto his own black stallion, mounting behind her in one fluid motion. His arms went around her to grab the reins, effectively caging her against his chest. He smelled of rain, leather, and tobacco. "Hold on," William Cavendish murmured near her ear. The vibration of his voice travelled down her spine. "Unless you wish to fall." "Where are you taking me?" "To Ashbourne Hall," he said, kicking the horse into a gallop. "To your new prison, Lady Cecily." Ashbourne Hall, Derbyshire, the following morning. The ride had been brutal. They had ridden for hours through the driving rain, stopping only once to change horses at a shadowed posting inn, where the stable boys averted their eyes from the Duke, as if looking at him directly would turn them to stone. By the time the estate came into view, dawn was breaking, a grey, bruised bruise of a sky over the peaks. Ashbourne Hall was not a home, it was a fortress. It rose from the crags of the Derbyshire landscape like a Gothic nightmare, all dark stone turrets and imposing iron gates. It was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, terrifying and cold. William guided the horse into the cobbled courtyard. Servants were already waiting, standing in lines despite the early hour. They stood rigid, terrified. He dismounted and pulled Cecily down. Her legs were so numb she nearly collapsed, but he caught her by the elbow, steadying her without embracing her. "Mrs. Halloway," he barked. A stern woman in severe black bombazine hurried forward. "Your Grace, get her dry, get her fed, put her in the Blue Tower." "The Blue Tower, Your Grace?" Mrs. Halloway looked shocked. "But that is the nursery wing. It hasn't been used since." "Do as I say." William cut her off. He turned to leave, his greatcoat swirling around his ankles. "Wait!" Cecily found her voice. She was shivering, covered in mud, exhausted, but anger burned hot in her chest. "You cannot just deposit me here like a sack of grain. Why have you done this? If you hated my father, why take me?" William stopped. He turned slowly, his grey eyes locking onto hers. In the morning light, he looked even more imposing, but she saw the fatigue etched around his eyes. "You think this is about you, Lady Cecily?" He let out a dry, humourless laugh. "You are of no consequence to me. You are merely the piece on the board that Crouch wanted most. By taking you, I deny him. That is all you are, a denial." "I am a person," she cried out, "not a chess piece." William walked back to her, invading her personal space until she had to crane her neck to look at him. He leaned down, his voice a dangerous whisper. "In this world, Cecily, we are all things to be bought and sold. You were sold to Crouch for money. You were sold to me for vengeance. Pray you do not find out which currency is more expensive." He turned and strode into the manor, leaving her standing in the cold courtyard. Cecily watched him go, her hands clenched into fists. He thought she was weak. He thought she was just a pampered London debutante who would weep and wither in his stone fortress. She reached down and touched the outline of the letter opener in her boot. "Mrs. Halloway," Cecily said, turning to the housekeeper. Her voice was calm now, stripped of fear. "I would like a bath, and I would like to know exactly which room the Duke sleeps in." Mrs. Halloway's eyes widened. "My lady?" "If I am to be a prisoner," Cecily said, walking toward the heavy oak doors, "I intend to be a very difficult one." Ashbourne Hall, 3 days later. The silence of Ashbourne Hall was heavier than the stone walls that built it. For 3 days, Cecily had seen nothing of the Duke. He was a phantom in his own home, leaving before dawn to ride the tenant farms and returning only after the house was asleep, the scent of brandy and cold air trailing in his wake. Cecily, however, was not one to sit idle and embroider by the fire while her fate hung in the balance. She was a Harford, and though her father had been a weak gambler, her mother had been a Howard, a bloodline known for its stubborn refusal to yield. She spent her days mapping the boundaries of her cage. The Blue Tower was less a prison and more a shrine to a forgotten time. The furniture was draped in dust sheets, but beneath them lay exquisite rosewood nurseries, untouched toys from 20 years ago, and a lingering smell of lavender and decay. On the 4th night, a storm battered the Peak District. The wind howled through the chimneys like a wounded animal. Cecily, unable to sleep, sat by the dying embers in her grate, reading the Bible her mother had given her. Then she heard it. It was not the wind. It was a sound distinct from the gale, a melodic, terrifying sound. Someone was playing the piano. It was faint, coming from the floor below, echoing through the ventilation of the old stone manor. It was a nocturne by Chopin, played with frantic, jagged intensity. Cecily grabbed her candle and the letter opener. She slipped out of her room, her bare feet making no sound on the cold flagstones of the corridor. She followed the music, descending the spiral servants' stairs that bypassed the main gallery. The music led her to the west wing, the part of the house Mrs. Halloway had explicitly forbidden her to enter. "The floorboards are rotten, my lady," the housekeeper had lied. Cecily knew a lie when she heard one. She had lived with her father, after all. The double doors to the west drawing room were ajar. Inside, the only light came from the fireplace, casting long, dancing shadows against the velvet-papered walls. Seated at the grand pianoforte was not the Duke. It was a woman. She was dressed in a nightgown of white lace that hung loosely off her skeletal frame. Her hair, long and dark, was matted and wild. She played with her eyes closed, tears streaming down her face, her fingers hammering the keys with a violence that threatened to snap the strings. Cecily stood frozen in the doorway. "Hello," she whispered. The music stopped abruptly. The woman turned. Her face was gaunt, her eyes wide and glassy, staring at something only she could see. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been shattered and glued back together wrong. "Is he gone?" the woman whispered, her voice rasping. "Is the spider gone?" "The spider?" Cecily stepped closer, lowering the letter opener. "Who are you?" "He has 8 legs," the woman hissed, standing up and backing away, knocking over the piano bench. "He spins webs of gold. He bought my hair. He bought my skin." "Cecily!" The roar came from the doorway behind her. Cecily spun around to see William, the Duke of Ashbourne, standing there. He was drenched from the rain, his chest heaving, his face a mask of terrified fury. "Get away from her," William commanded, his voice shaking. I said get out!" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, but not to strike Cecily. He moved past her, rushing to the terrified woman. He took off his wet greatcoat and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. "Georgiana," he murmured, his voice changing instantly from thunder to a gentle rain. "It's all right, Georgie. He isn't here. I promise you, he isn't here." The woman, Georgiana, collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "The spider, William. I heard his carriage, the wheels, crunching the bones." No, that was just the storm." William looked over Georgiana's head at Cecily. His eyes were hard, pleading, and incredibly weary. "Leave us. Please." Cecily hesitated, looking at the broken woman and the giant of a man holding her with such tenderness. She realized then that she had misjudged the monster. "She is burning up," Cecily said, stepping forward instead of back. She reached out and touched Georgiana's forehead. "She has a fever, Your Grace. She needs willow bark and cool compresses, not a drafty drawing room." "I can handle it," William snapped, though his grip on his sister tightened. "You can handle a horse, Your Grace," Cecily said firmly, channeling the authority of the matrons who ran the London charity wards. "You can handle a pistol, but you are terrified of this." "Let me help her." William looked at her, really looked at her, for the second time since the carriage. He saw the resolve in her jaw. He saw that she wasn't fleeing. "She is my sister," he said, his voice breaking. "And if you speak a word of her condition to anyone outside these walls, I will destroy you." "Help me get her to bed," Cecily replied, ignoring the threat, "and boil some water." The next morning, the fever had broken just before dawn. Georgiana was sleeping peacefully in the West Wing bedroom, Mrs. Halloway keeping a silent vigil by the bedside. Cecily sat in the kitchen, nursing a mug of strong tea. Her hands were raw from wringing out cold cloths all night. She was exhausted, but her mind was racing. The door to the kitchen opened. William entered. He had not slept either. The dark circles under his eyes were like bruises. He wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms scarred from fencing and labor. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. He didn't summon a servant. He walked to the stove, poured himself coffee from the pot, and sat opposite Cecily at the rough wooden table. "She was the belle of the season," William said quietly, staring into his cup. "5 years ago. Georgiana. She was light and laughter and—" He trailed off. "What happened to her?" Cecily asked softly. William looked up, his grey eyes piercing. Benedict Crouch happened to her. Cecily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. "Our father died leaving the estate in ruin," William explained, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "I was in the army, fighting in Afghanistan. Georgiana was alone here. Crouch held the mortgages. He offered a solution. He would forgive the debt if Georgiana married him. She refused. She tried. He forced the issue." William's hand clenched around the mug until his knuckles turned white. "He took liberties. He isolated her. He convinced her that I was dead, that she had no one. By the time I returned, 2 years later, he had driven her into the madness you saw last night. He didn't marry her. He used her, broke her mind to ensure she couldn't testify to his fraud regarding the estate, and then discarded her like a broken toy. He called himself the Spider," Cecily whispered, remembering Georgiana's words. "I challenged him," William said. "But Crouch is a coward. He refused to duel. He used his lawyers to shield himself. He kept the debts hanging over me, threatening to have Georgiana committed to Bedlam Asylum if I moved against him. He owns the judges. He owns the banks." He looked at Cecily. "When I heard he had bought you, when I heard he had purchased another young woman to take to his country estate to clear a father's debt. I saw it happening all over again. Cecily sat back, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The abduction, the coldness, the refusal to touch her. You didn't kidnap me to hurt my father, she realized. You kidnapped me to stop Crouch from doing to me what he did to her. I am not a hero, Cecily. William stood up, pacing the small kitchen. I am a selfish man. I took you because denying him his prize was the only way I could hurt him. I intended to keep you here until he lost interest, and then send you to a convent in France where he couldn't reach you. And what if I don't want to go to a convent? Cecily stood up too. William stopped pacing. He stood mere inches from her. The air between them crackled with a sudden, undeniable electricity. The animosity of the last few days had evaporated, replaced by a raw, exposed vulnerability. "Then what do you want, Cecily?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You have no money. Your father has abandoned you. You are a woman ruined by scandal the moment you stepped into my carriage." "I want to fight him," she said, surprising herself. "I know his books, William. My father made me manage his ledgers. I know how men like Crouch hide their money. I heard his solicitor, Mr. Grist, talking in the carriage before you stopped us. He mentioned a shadow account in the Cayman hold." William stared at her. A slow, incredulous smile touched his lips. The first time she had seen him smile. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines of his scars. "You understand forensic accounting." "I understand how to catch a cheat," she corrected. "If we can prove his fraud, we can strip him of his power. We can save your estate. We can save Georgiana." William reached out. His hand hovered for a moment before he gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, rough skin against soft, sending a jolt of heat straight to her core. "You are a dangerous woman, Lady Cecily," he murmured. "I am a desperate one, Your Grace." He leaned in. The distance between them closed. It was inevitable, a magnetic pull of two survivors finding anchor in the storm. His lips brushed hers, tentative at first, a question asked in the silence of the kitchen. When she didn't pull away, he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a gentle suitor. It was the kiss of a starving man, desperate and consuming. Cecily wound her hands into his shirt, pulling him closer, the fear of the last week burning away in the fire of his touch. For a moment, there was no Crouch, no debt, no madness, just the heat of him and the smell of rain and coffee. The kitchen door burst open. Mrs. Halloway stood there, pale as a sheet. "Your Grace," she gasped, averting her eyes from the embrace. The gatekeeper just rang the bell. William pulled away from Cecily, his body instantly tense, the soldier returning to the front lines. "What is it?" "Soldiers, Your Grace, red coats, and a magistrate." Mrs. Halloway swallowed hard. "And Mr. Crouch, they are at the main gate. They have a warrant for your arrest for kidnapping and murder." The main gates, 1 hour later. The heavy iron gates of Ashbourne Hall were barred, but through the bars the threat was visible. A dozen soldiers stood in formation, muskets grounded but ready. A magistrate in a powdered wig sat atop a nervous horse, and in the centre, seated in a plush carriage with the window lowered, was Benedict Crouch. He was a rotund man, but not soft. He had the hard, predatory look of a toad that ate poisonous flies. His eyes were small, black beads that glittered with malice. William stood on the other side of the gate, flanked by his own stable hands and groundskeepers, men who held pitchforks and old fowling pieces. It was a feudal standoff in the middle of the 19th century. Cecily stood on the balcony above, hidden by the stone balustrade, watching. She had refused to hide in the cellar. "Open the gate, Ashbourne!" the magistrate shouted, his voice cracking. "By order of the Crown!" "On what charge?" William's voice boomed, steady and calm. "Abduction of a peer's daughter." The magistrate unrolled a scroll. "And the murder of Baron Harford," Cecily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. William stiffened. "Explain yourself." Crouch leaned out of his carriage window. His voice was oily, smooth, and projected clearly across the courtyard. A tragedy, truly. Poor Baron Harford. Found dead in his study 2 days ago, a pistol in his hand. The grief of his daughter's abduction by a notorious rake was simply too much for him. "You lie," William growled. "You drove him to it." "The law sees only the note he left," Crouch smiled, leaving all his assets and the guardianship of his underage daughter to his principal creditor. "Me." Crouch's eyes scanned the manor windows. "She is mine, Ashbourne, by law and by contract. Give her to me, and I will ask the magistrate to show leniency regarding your theft. Refuse, and these soldiers will burn your house to the ground with you inside it." William didn't move. "She's not here." "Oh, come now," Crouch laughed. "Mr. Grist told me everything. You played the highwayman. Very romantic. But the play is over. I have the papers. I own her." Up on the balcony, Cecily felt a cold resolve settle over her. Her father was dead. The last tether to her old life was cut. She was legally the property of the monster below. But she remembered the letter opener in her boot. She remembered the weeping woman in the West Wing. She remembered William's kiss and the way he had looked at her, not as a receipt, but as a partner. She turned and ran back into the house. She didn't run to hide. She ran to the library. "Mrs. Halloway," she shouted as she descended the stairs. "Where does the Duke keep the estate deeds? The old ones?" "In the strong-box, my lady, but—" "Get them, now!" Cecily burst out of the front doors, running across the courtyard toward the gate. "Cecily, go back!" William shouted, turning to her, panic flaring in his eyes for the first time. "Open the gate!" Cecily commanded the gatekeeper. "No!" William grabbed her arm. "He will take you. I cannot stop the army, Cecily. If they fire, my men die. I won't let that happen." "Trust me," she whispered, looking up at him. "Do you trust me?" William looked at the soldiers, then at her. He nodded, once. "Open it." The iron gates groaned and swung open. Crouch stepped out of his carriage, a triumphant smirk on his lips. He adjusted his silk cravat. "Finally. Come here, my dear. You look dreadful. We shall get you a new wardrobe in London. Black, for mourning, of course." Cecily walked forward. She stopped 5 paces from him. The mud sucked at her boots. The soldiers watched, fingers on triggers. "I am not going with you, Mr. Crouch," she said, her voice ringing out in the frosty air. "You have no choice, child. I am your guardian." "You are a fraud," she declared. She held up a bundle of papers she had grabbed from the strong-box, though in truth they were just sheep farming logs. But Crouch didn't know that. "And I know about the Manchester shipment." Crouch's smile faltered. "I don't know what you are talking about." "The opium," she lied. It was a gamble, a massive, terrified gamble, based on a rumor she had heard her father whisper years ago about Crouch's Eastern interests. "Hidden in the cotton bales. The Royal Navy frowns on smuggling, Mr. Crouch, especially when you are cheating the Crown out of its tax." "She is hysterical," Crouch snapped at the magistrate. "Seize her." "If you take me," Cecily shouted, stepping back toward William, "I will testify. I will tell the courts about Georgiana. I will tell them about the poison you used on your second wife. Arsenic, wasn't it? Traces remain in the hair, Mr. Crouch, even after years in the grave. Shall we exhume her?" The color drained from Crouch's face. It was a guess, but a calculated one. "Arrest them!" Crouch screamed, losing his composure. "Kill him! Hold!" The shout came from the road behind the soldiers. A rider approached on a white horse, flanked by 2 other men in suits. It was not a soldier. It was a man carrying a distinct leather portfolio. "Mr. Thaddeus Grist?" Crouch squinted. "What are you doing here?" The solicitor slid off his horse. He looked disheveled, terrified, but he walked past Crouch to the magistrate. "I wish to turn Queen's evidence," Grist announced, his voice trembling. "Grist!" Crouch roared. "I will have your tongue!" "You tried to have me killed!" Grist shouted back, pointing a shaking finger at Crouch. "On the road back to London, your hired thugs tried to silence me because I knew the contract was forged. The Duke didn't kill the Baron, you did. You sent men to Wimpole Street." A collective gasp went through the crowd. William stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword he had drawn from a sheath at his side. "It seems, Mr. Crouch, that the game has changed." The magistrate looked from Grist to Crouch. He signaled the soldiers. "Secure, Mr. Crouch. You cannot do this. I am a wealthy man. I own this county," Crouch shrieked as 2 redcoats grabbed his arms. "You own nothing," William said, his voice low and deadly. He wrapped an arm around Cecily's waist, pulling her into his side. "Take him away." As they dragged the screaming man toward the carriage, Cecily felt her knees give way. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaking. William caught her. "Did you really know about the opium?" he whispered into her hair. "No," she breathed, burying her face in his chest. "I just knew he was a bad man, and bad men always have dirty secrets." William laughed, a true, deep sound of relief. "Remind me never to play cards against you, Lady Cecily." London, December 1842. The scandal did not die quietly. In the weeks following the arrest at the gates of Ashbourne Hall, the story of the abducted Baron's daughter became the most voraciously consumed news in England. The Morning Chronicle called it a Gothic romance come to life, while the gossip sheets painted Lady Cecily Harford as a fallen woman, a temptress who had bewildered a duke into violence. Cecily sat in the gallery of the Old Bailey, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She wore black, mourning for the father who had sold her, and perhaps for the reputation she would never recover. Beside her sat William. He did not look at the judge or the jury. He looked only at the man in the dock. Benedict Crouch looked smaller without his carriage and his fine furs. Stripped of his influence, with Mr. Grist singing like a canary to the prosecution in exchange for immunity, Crouch was revealed not as a titan of industry, but as a desperate fraudster. The court heard it all. The forged contracts, the arsenic traces found in the hair of his second wife, exhumed just as Cecily had threatened, and the suiciding of Baron Harford. When the gavel fell, sentencing Crouch to transportation for life to the penal colony in Van Diemen's Land, the courtroom erupted. William did not cheer. He simply let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He turned to Cecily, his grey eyes searching hers. "It is done," he said quietly. "The debt is paid." "Not all debts," Cecily replied, looking at the jeering crowd that was now turning its hungry gaze towards them. "We still have to survive the peace, William." Ashbourne Hall, January 1843. Returning to Derbyshire was a retreat, but not an escape. The winter of 1843 was brutal, burying the Peak District in 6 feet of snow. Ashbourne Hall became an island in a white sea, cut off from the world. For Cecily, this isolation was a strange, suspended reality. She was not a guest, for she had nowhere else to go. She was not a prisoner, for the gates were open. But she was not a wife. She was the mistress of the hall, in function, if not in title. The household staff, initially terrified of her, began to thaw. They watched her with the Duke. They saw how she did not flinch when he barked orders about the leaking roof in the East Wing. They saw how she sat with him in the library late into the night, the two of them bent over ledgers, arguing over crop rotations and tenant rents. "You cannot raise the rent on the Miller family," Cecily argued one evening, the firelight casting a warm glow on her face. "The stream froze 3 times this month. They cannot grind grain. If you squeeze them, they will starve." William looked up from his brandy. He was tired. The trial had drained him, and the maintenance of the estate was a constant, grinding burden. "If we do not collect, Cecily, we cannot repair the stables. If the roof collapses, the horses die. It is a calculation of necessity." "It is a calculation of cruelty," she countered, sliding a piece of parchment toward him. "I have found a discrepancy in the wool shipments from last year. Your previous steward was skimming. Recover those funds, and you can spare the Millers." William picked up the paper, scanning her neat, precise handwriting. He looked at her, a mixture of annoyance and awe on his face. "You found this in an hour? It took me 3 months to even balance the columns." "You look at the numbers as enemies to be defeated," she said, taking a sip of tea. "I look at them as a story. Every number tells you what someone is doing or what they are hiding." William leaned back, a rare, genuine smile breaking the hardness of his face. "You are terrifying, Lady Cecily." "I am practical, Your Grace." The air between them shifted. It often did in these late hours. The animosity had long since faded, replaced by a companionable silence that felt dangerous in its intimacy. They were 2 outcasts, hiding in a stone fortress. William stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the snow. "You should not be here, Cecily." "The roads are blocked, William, unless you intend to give me a shovel." "I mean here, in this life," he said, his voice rough. "You read the papers. You know what they call you. The Duke's concubine. The fallen lady. As long as you stay under my roof without a ring on your finger, you are ruining your future." "My future was ruined the night my father signed that contract," she said, standing up and moving to the fireplace. "I have no desire to return to London society, William. I have no desire to be paraded at balls by aunts who whisper behind their fans." "And what do you desire?" He turned to face her. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. "You," she wanted to say. "I desire the man who rode through a storm to save a stranger. I desire the man who holds his sister when she weeps." But she was afraid. She was afraid that he only saw her as a responsibility, a life he had accidentally broken and was now obligated to fix. "I desire to finish these accounts," she said, looking down, "so the Millers can keep their farm." William watched her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he nodded, once, and poured himself another drink. "As you wish." February 1843. The true turning point came not with the Duke, but with Georgiana. For months, William's sister had been a ghost, flitting through the corridors, terrified of shadows. Cecily had taken over her care, dismissing the severe nurses William had hired and replacing them with patients. One afternoon, Cecily sat in the west drawing room, the room where she had first found Georgiana. The piano sat open. Cecily began to play. She was not a virtuoso, but she played with a gentle, steady hand. A simple folk song, one her mother used to hum. She felt a presence behind her. She didn't stop playing. "That is incorrect," a small voice whispered. Cecily paused, keeping her hands on the keys. "Is it?" Georgiana stepped into the light. She looked better. Her hair was washed and braided, her dress clean. She still looked fragile, like glass that might shatter at a high note, but she was present. "The time signature," Georgiana murmured, moving closer. "It should be slower, like a heartbeat." "Show me," Cecily said, sliding over on the bench. Georgiana hesitated. She looked at the keys as if they were hot coals. Then slowly, she sat. Her trembling fingers touched the ivory. She played a chord, then a melody. It wasn't the frantic, terrified noise of the night of the storm. It was music. Sad, yes, but beautiful. Cecily saw William standing in the doorway. He had stopped dead, his hand on the doorframe. He was watching his sister play for the first time in 3 years. Tears stood in the Duke's eyes. He didn't move, didn't breathe, terrified that any sound would break the spell. When Georgiana finished, she looked at Cecily. I remember this song." "It is beautiful," Cecily said. Georgiana looked at the doorway. She saw William. For the first time, she didn't recoil. She didn't ask if the spider was coming. She smiled, a weak, tentative thing. "William, I think I would like tea." William choked back a sob, nodding rapidly. "Tea? Yes, I will. I will have Mrs. Halloway bring the best china." He turned and walked away, but not before Cecily saw the look he gave her. It was a look of such profound gratitude, such raw vulnerability, that it shook her to her core. It was the look of a man who was falling in love and was absolutely terrified of it. March 1840. The snow melted, the roads cleared, and with the spring came the reality William had been dreading. A carriage arrived from London. It carried a solicitor, not the slimy Mr. Grist, but a respectable family lawyer representing Cecily's distant aunt, Lady Weatherby. They sat in the formal parlour. The aunt had not come herself. She wouldn't deign to enter the house of sin. "Lady Weatherby is prepared to offer you a home in Bath," the solicitor explained, keeping his gloves on as if afraid of catching a disease. "She has arranged a story. You have been recovering from a nervous constitution in the country. If you return now, with a suitable dowry, which His Grace has generously offered to provide, a match might still be found. A widower, perhaps. Or a clergyman." Cecily sat in silence. She looked at William. He was standing by the fireplace, his back rigid. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You offered a dowry?" Cecily asked, her voice dangerously calm. "It is the only way," William said, staring at the flames. "You cannot stay here, Cecily. The roads are open. You have a life to live." "A life in Bath? Marrying a clergyman I do not know? Creating a lie to cover a year of my life? A respectable life." William spun around, his voice rising. "Look at this place, Cecily. It is a tomb. I am a man haunted by the past. I have enemies. I have a sister who requires constant care. I have a name that frightens children. You are 20 years old. You are brilliant. You are beautiful. You deserve light and parties, and a husband who doesn't wake up screaming from memories of war. And you think you can just pay me off?" Cecily stood up, her hands trembling. "Like my father did. Just another transaction." "I am trying to save you," William roared. "I don't want to be saved," Cecily shouted back, shocking the solicitor into silence. "I saved myself, William. I saved myself the night I got into your carriage. I saved myself when I faced Crouch at the gates. And I have been saving this damned estate for 3 months." She walked up to him, ignoring the solicitor entirely. "Do you love me?" she asked. The room went silent. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. William's face worked, a battle between his heart and his self-loathing. "Cecily, please, do. You. Love. Me. You know I do," he whispered, the fight draining out of him. I love you enough to let you go." "Well, that is a pity," Cecily said, turning to the solicitor, "because I am not going anywhere. You may tell my aunt that I am unavailable. I have a harvest to plan, and the Duke is incompetent at math." The solicitor gaped. "My lady, this is highly irregular." "Good day, sir," Cecily said. When the solicitor had fled, leaving them alone in the parlour, the silence stretched out again. William looked at her, defeated. "You're stubborn." "I am a Harford," she said. "We hold on to things until they ruin us. But I think, Your Grace, that you might be worth the ruin." April 1843. 3 weeks later, the final barrier fell. It was a crisp morning in the garden. The crocuses were pushing through the mud, purple and gold. Cecily was inspecting the rose bushes, checking for frost damage. She felt him approach before she heard him. He moved differently now, lighter, less burdened. "The solicitor sent a letter," William said, stopping beside her. "Your aunt has disowned you." "Good," Cecily said, snipping a dead branch. "I never liked her tea." William chuckled, a low rumble. He took the shears from her hand and set them on the stone bench. He took her gloved hands in his. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is dangerous," she teased. "I have been thinking that since you refuse to leave, and since you have usurped my authority with the tenants, and since my sister prefers your company to mine, I am left with very few options." He looked at her, and the playfulness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a deep, burning intensity. "I cannot offer you a reputation, Cecily. The scandal will follow us. They will whisper about us when we enter a room. They will say I bought you. They will say you trapped me." "Let them talk," Cecily said. "They don't know that you cry when you hear Chopin. They don't know that you sent half the winter stores to the village so the children wouldn't go hungry. They don't know you, William. I do." William reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a ring. It was not a modern diamond from a London jeweller. It was old, heavy gold, set with a dark, blood-red ruby, surrounded by small, rough-cut diamonds. "This was my mother's," he said. "She was a difficult woman. She loved fiercely, and she didn't give a damn what the world thought." He dropped to one knee in the damp earth. "Cecily Harford, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming the Duchess of Ashbourne? Will you help me rebuild this house? Will you stay with me through the winter and the madness?" Cecily looked down at him. She thought of the frightened girl in the carriage, the girl who thought her life was over. She looked at the man before her, flawed, scarred, complicated, and utterly hers. She pulled off her gardening glove. She extended her hand. "I will," she said softly, "on one condition." William paused as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Name it." "We burn the furniture in the Blue Tower," she said. "I want a nursery that doesn't smell of the past. I want a nursery that waits for the future." William looked up at her, his eyes shining. He stood and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. He kissed her, and this time it wasn't a desperate kiss in a kitchen or a frantic kiss in the rain. It was a promise. "Burn it all," he murmured against her lips. "We start new." Summer 1845. 2 years later, the Ashbourne scandal was old news, replaced by newer, duller gossip. But in Derbyshire, the legend grew. They said the Duke of Ashbourne had been tamed by a witch. They said she managed the accounts better than the Bank of England. They said the Duchess played the piano with the Duke's mad sister, and that laughter could be heard ringing from the windows of the West Wing. And on a warm July afternoon, a carriage rolled down the drive. It didn't stop at the gate. It rolled right up to the front door. William stood on the steps, holding a toddler in his arms. a boy with grey eyes and a stubborn jaw. Beside him stood Cecily, heavy with her second child, her hand resting on the head of a massive wolfhound. She looked out at the valley, at the green fields and the thriving tenant farms. She leaned her head against William's shoulder. "Do you regret it?" William asked quietly, shifting the boy in his arms. "The balls? The seasons? The London life?" Cecily looked at her husband, and then at the son who would never know the fear of being sold, who would never know debt or cold. "I regret nothing," she said. "I didn't lose my life in that carriage, William. I found it." William kissed her forehead. "Come inside, Duchess. It's time for tea." The heavy oak doors of Ashbourne Hall closed, not with an ominous boom, but with a solid, comforting thud, shutting out the world and keeping the warmth inside. And that is the full, untamed story of the scandal of Ashbourne Hall. What started as a transaction in the dark became a partnership that defied the rigid laws of Victorian society. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was trauma, there was scandal, and there was hard work. But that is what makes it feel so real. I'd love to know, do you think Cecily was right to stay? Or should she have taken the dowry and started fresh in Bath? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, please like this video. It tells YouTube to share these history-inspired romances with more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. I have a story coming up next week about a pirate queen that you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.